Chapter 15. The Interpretation of Literature. Try to frequent the company of your betters. In books and life that is the most wholesome society. Learn to admire rightly. The great pleasure of life is that. Thackeray. One of the noblest uses of human speech is to praise with discrimination, and another is to share one's discoveries. This, for the student, is what must pass for criticism. With regard to the word criticism, there exists a notable confusion of ideas, even since Matthew Arnold's patient endeavor to define it once and for all. Nothing can be more hypocritical than for young people who are still in the rudiments of literature to be forced into pronouncing objective judgments as to the worth of literature. Students instinctively feel this, and resent all attempts to get them to pretend a knowledge which they do not possess. On the other hand, they are beginning to be dissatisfied with judging books and other works of art on the ground of mere impulsive like or dislike. It is time, then, for something less ambitious than criticism and more thoughtful than caprice. Interpretation rather than criticism. Now criticism, whatever else it does, must at least interpret. Its judgment of value is based on interpretation. A book review, for example, must first tell us what the book is about, what the author has tried to do. For the time being, the critic stands in the position of a neutral or friend in his endeavor to make known what the writer has attempted. Only by special training is a critic really fitted to go much beyond that point and to show wherein the attempt has succeeded and wherein it has failed, to estimate its value for science or history or literature, whatever field it seeks to enrich. True criticism is an attempt to help people to understand why a thing is good, and to profit by its goodness, or to show them why it is bad, and to guard them against its badness. The expert criticism that has value for society is beyond our reach to produce, but the honest interpretation of the reader who likes a book, and knows why he likes it, is within the reach of all. It is simple, making no pretense, modest, demanding no assent. The interpreter's chief concern is not that others shall agree with his opinion, but that they shall be attracted to read and to judge for themselves. The imaginary audience. Let the student choose from his recent reading a novel, a book of short stories or essays, a play or group of plays, a biography, and prepare to formulate his ideas for the writing of an interpretation. Whether read during the college year or previously, the book must be one that he admires, one that is worth rereading, worth buying. It must be the kind of book concerning which one keeps thinking, Jim would like this, or I wonder if Bill ever read this book. It's just his style. Remember Jim and Bill in the interpretation. Let their mild, well-bred interest, or their incredulous smiles, or their deep-rooted antipathy to this particular kind of book spur the writer to his best efforts. How can it be that a biography should be interesting? They wearily inquire. Why read a problem play? Are there not enough problems without hunting them up in books? How can a professional jester say anything wise? Is Saul also among the prophets? Good interpretation meets such opposition not with a weak, I like it anyhow, but with a defense of the faith and a counterattack upon the tyranny of second-hand opinions. The interpreter is not a partisan of any particular belief of his own, but a partisan of the spirit of open-mindedness against the stolid philistinism of brains but half awake. He will rouse such people with his enthusiasm if he can, but if that fails, he will stick a pin in them just to see them jump. Anything but the yawns of contented ignorance. The harmless pretense of discovery. In this happy mood, not unmixed with mischief, let us see where to begin the task of interpretation. We are not ashamed to admit that our enthusiasm is naive, the freshness of knowledge newly won in fields familiar to the learned world. The book we read for the first time last month, so far from being our discovery, has beguiled 1,000 readers before our day into the pleasing illusions of the pioneer. But what of that? For us and for our audience, it is new. We, thank heaven, are not yet old enough to apologize for our admirations. We know no better than to suppose that every book is a new book until we have read it. Each generation must launch its own argosies and find its own Hesperides. The Golden Hind of youth is the one immortal ship. She carries a new crew on every voyage, and she will be sailing still when every port is charted and the gay young sailors can discover nothing but themselves. Youth makes us bad judges but excellent partisans. In middle age, men are prone to laugh at their fellow who is always full of the book he has read last. But in youth he is welcome in any company, if he knows how to interpret his praise. Let the chosen book, then, be an old book hitherto unknown, or a new book still in trial before the world. Lamb's Letters, or the Letters of Edward Lear, the life of an Elizabethan voyager, or the logbook of a modern Arctic explorer, a novel of Jane Austen, or of William de Morgan, or William J. Locke, the poems of Robert Herrick, or of Alfred Noyes, Walton's Complete Angler, or a recent volume by John Burroughs, or John Moore. Anything that will brighten a cloudy day, or beguile a lonely night, or people an empty house with the figures of mystery and fancy. Over the choice there need be little lingering, for a man may choose pretty much what he likes. He is only to be sure that he does like it, and willing to tell other people why. The three questions to be answered. There are three questions that must always be asked and answered by a critic. 1. What did the author attempt? 2. How well did he accomplish it? 3. What is the value of his work for his age and for ours? It has already been pointed out that to answer adequately the second of these questions calls for more learning than most of us possess. The best that can ordinarily be done in bringing a book to the attention of those who do not know it is to show what the book stands for and what it signifies to us, to interpret it, and to appreciate it. Of the three tasks of criticism, 1. Fair interpretation, 2. Impartial judgment, and 3. Personal appreciation, the first is a matter of study, the second of taste, and the third of sympathy. By study we find out what situation confronted the author, such as the social abuses which stimulated Dickens and Charles Reade, and the end he had in view. By taste, which is an educated judgment based on permanent standards, we rank his work in relation to that of his contemporaries and of other ages, a difficult task from which it is hard to separate personal prejudice. By sympathy, a feeling quite as much as an idea, we voice the desire to see a good thing more widely known. To interpret a book does not mean to write a biographical sketch of the author or a condensed summary of his narrative. Both his life and his story, if it be a story, are to be used, but not rehearsed for their own sake. The questions to be answered under the first head are such as these. 1. Interpretation in the light of the age. What kind of age did the author live in? What were its dominant interests in politics, industry, morals, manners, religion, or other human concerns? Illustration. Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress is to be interpreted in the light of 17th century nonconformist religion, Bedford jail, Restoration corruption, and so on. Bret Harte's stories require some knowledge of old days in California. 2. Interpretation in the light of the author's life. What is there in the author's life that throws light on the subject of his book? Illustrations. Sartor Resartus demands for its understanding a knowledge of Carlyle's early intellectual and moral struggles. David Copperfield is full of autobiography. Bacon's essays are a strange commentary on his career. 3. Interpretation in the light of literary tendencies. What literary tendencies were dominant when the book was written, to which it owes its origin, or against which it was a protest? Illustrations. Almost any contemporary social problem play may be traced back to Ibsen. Many historical romances of the present time belong to the Romantic revival represented by Stevenson. The realists owe their indebtedness to Balzac. 4. Interpretation in the light of the author's aim. If the book is but slightly affected by contemporary problems, the author's life, or prevalent literary fashions, what is the task the author seems to have set before himself? Illustrations. George Eliot's Adam Bede may be interpreted as an attempt to show the far-reaching and irrevocable consequences of a moral choice by a moral being. Hardy's novels, almost any of them, as an attempt to show the far-reaching consequences of moral accidents in a world of perverse destiny. We may consider Thackeray's Pendennis and the Newcomes, Dickens's Great Expectations, Meredith's The Ordeal of Richard Feverel, as studies of youthful selfishness, blindness, and folly. Blackmore's Lorna Doone, Black's A Princess of Thule as romances, which reflect by means of a love story the conditions of a past age or a remote and picturesque region of country. Summary of the story merely incidental. In the course of an interpretation of a novel, a play, or a narrative poem like Enoch Arden, the writer will necessarily sum up in a few sentences the outline of the plot, but he will do this as a means, not as an end. He will use it to show how realistic the author is by pointing out the homely kind of story of which he has made use, or how pessimistic he is by instancing 2 or 3 of the unnecessary factors in his tragedy. No attempt should be made really to tell the story, to sum up the substance of essays, or to condense the biographical facts of a, quote, life and letters, unquote. Experience shows that this is not the way to interest people in reading a book. There is nothing duller than a condensed summary. It has its place in notebooks and other personal memoranda, but not in the written or spoken appreciation of literature. The retelling of a story in sufficient detail to reflect something of its vitality and humor or pathos is a totally different thing, which will be studied in Chapter 17. In the present task, which is expository, no summary of narrative should extend beyond a paragraph. Even in that paragraph, it is usually best to avoid the tedious historical present tense, adhering to the never monotonous past tense of all good narrative. Plays are sometimes best summarized in the present tense, novels and stories rarely or never. Is the book well written? We come now to the second main question. How well has the author accomplished the task which he attempted? While the student can contribute no answer which will have real worth as criticism, he can and should meet such inquiries as the following. 1. Does the book stick to the point? Is the evident purpose of it obscured by a lack of unity? At the end of the book, does the reader have a distinct impression of the dominant idea or mood for which it stands? 2. Has the book good proportion? Is there any considerable part of it which occupies too much space for the accomplishment of the purpose and the maintenance of interest? 3. In the case of narrative, are the descriptions vivid, the conversations natural, and the characters lifelike? 4. So far as the student is able to compare the book with others by the same author, or with books by his contemporaries, or with similar works of other periods, how does it rank in such a comparison? These are questions to which every intelligent reader can, upon reflection, make some kind of answer. They do not go very far toward fixing an author's real rank, but they help form a definite link between question 1 and question 3, to force us to decide in our own minds why we think a book is worthwhile. The third step is impossible without the first, and of slight value without the second. When those have been attempted, however imperfectly, we may ask 2 more questions. Historical significance. What historical importance has such an attempt as this author's, achieved with such a degree of success, in changing the life and thought of his time? Illustrations. Uncle Tom's Cabin, a great idea cruelly executed, had, because of the circumstances of the age, a tremendous effect upon public sentiment. It is thus historically important, though of little significance for literature. Byron's English Bards and Scotch Reviewers, Lowell's Biglow Papers, Poe's The Murderers in the Rue Morgue, and The Gold Bug all of historical significance in excess of their absolute values. The question is, did the book stop at old abuse or begin a new type? Did it mark the beginning, the climax, or the end of any significant stage in human progress? If so, it has value for students and may be recommended to their attention. For the student is supposed to be a person interested in tracing the beginnings of things. Education in its higher stages depends very largely upon this interest in origins. Felix qui potuit rerum cognoscere causes. Books, which one would never think of bringing before a club of businessmen or the audience of working girls, have value for the audience, which is pledged to at least 4 years of intellectual life. The final question of personal appeal. The other and final question is, what value has this book for us? This is the substitution of judgment for impulse, the forming of a deliberate estimate, the voicing of thoughtful praise, the appeal of an intelligent sympathy. Does the book make goodness more compelling and weakness more base? Does it radiate cheer or teem with fascinating mystery? Do we learn in its pages how to read character, how to penetrate the dullness of the good and the false brilliancy of evil? Or is it just a good book to transport one out of every day to a world where weariness and satiety are known and the zest of youth is inexhaustible? Here is where we must remember Jim. He is to read this book, and we must show cause why he cannot afford to miss it. He is a creature of inertia, prejudice, and a singular blindness to his own best interest. Jim is everybody except ourselves. Therefore, it is our task to rouse his curiosity, placate his instinctive resentment against those who would improve him, and kindle in him the spark of intellectual ambition. To do that, we must study the book, study the causes of our likes and dislikes, and study Jim. Viewed in this light, the interpretation of literature becomes tangible, even to the beginner. The interpretation of literature to oneself. All that has been said in this chapter applies to the interpretation to another mind of literature already known and valued by oneself. There is another sense in which the interpretation of literature means the reader's own approach to literature, his own apprehension of its meaning and value. It will be evident that there is no time or place in a first course in composition for the systematic study of literature, except in the form of specimens of literary types. College courses in the history of literature take up those principles of interpretation of poetry, drama, and fiction upon which our study of these artistic forms is based. In such courses, the application of the questions above suggested is just as appropriate as informing one's estimate of a familiar book for purposes of composition. Nothing can be more important for a student than to learn to ask instantly of any work of art, a picture, a statue, a building, as well as a novel or a play, what was the artist's design? Why did he choose it? How near did he come to realizing it? It is so that we judge men when we contemplate their lives, so that we estimate the success of a system of government, or an educational method, or a plan for city parks and boulevards, or a mechanical invention, or any other subject of human judgment. What was he getting at? How near did he come to it? How well do I like it? These are the questions, of which the third is most prominent on the lips of the beginner, the first most interesting to the student, and the second most appropriate to the enlightened and generous critic. Quote, "Let such teach others who themselves excel, and censure freely who have written well." Unquote. If culture is an endeavor, quote, "to know the best that is known and thought in the world," unquote, those who aim to become cultured will need to ask themselves far more often, what is the best, and why is it the best, than, does it, at the present backward stage of my development, appeal to me? It is our business to learn to know the best. The liking will take care of itself. Culture rests on knowledge, not on caprice. We grow by reaching beyond our height. Something tells us there is more higher up, and we climb. This is education.